If you had a chance to live a better life, would you? And let's say all it really takes is understanding a few different ideas that you can start to just better your life. We all are trying to figure this thing of life out, and every guru has their different points about what it is that they say that you need to be doing in order to live that lifestyle that you want to be living. And honestly, it all really depends on the personality. But today, I want to share with you five different ideas that I personally use for myself and really share with my clients to help them try to live that better life. You see, throughout this game of life, we all want to step it up. We all want to do the things. We all want to find like the cheat code and the hack in order to really take our lives to the next level, whether it's in our personal lives or whether it's financially or in our relationships or spiritually, whatever area of our lives we're trying to work on, we want to be stepping up. If we could, we ideally would all want to like press a button and just increase the uh, the ability in all these different columns that we have. And one of the things that I sort of formulate and the way I view it is that if you have like a chart, like a graph chart, and under each column, you have a different category of your life. So maybe in one area, it's your relationships, and one it's your finances, one it's your, religious life, or whatever area it is that you're working on. You have these different columns, and throughout our lives, we want to try to get the columns to go higher and higher and higher. And we sometimes focus so much on the top of the actual graph, if in terms of like the columns and how high we've gotten. But sometimes we have to realize that it's more about what goes underneath the column, what goes underneath the graph. You see, we have to recognize that if we want to really be successful, we have to be having the correct input into all the different columns. And if we could put those things and put the things that we want inside each column, we'll be able to raise the column over time. But most people are so focused on the top that they get so frustrated and so annoyed about their lives because they should be further along. They should have better relationships. Why is it that so and so has something and I don't? Or even if you're not comparing, you just know that I want to take responsibility. I want to have a better life. And yet I, for some reason, can't figure this out. So today I want to talk about a way that we can not necessarily focus about the top of the graph, but really the input that goes into the graph to really raise the graph and raise the bar, but what is really going on. And it really starts with ourselves. And we could start being better versions of ourselves, then is it not reasonable that all our different areas of our life are going to be better off? And this is something that I think is so important because so many people focus more on what the result is going to be. They focus on what they want and the goals, which is extremely important, but they don't focus on the other part, which is the biggest variable themselves, because they could be doing X, Y, and Z, but if they themselves are miserable, life is going to be miserable. If they themselves are anxious and stressed out all the time, then they're going to be anxious and stressed out all the time in life. And if we can start to work on ourselves in these specific areas, then our lives, no matter where the graph is, we're going to be more appreciative. We're going to be able to enjoy it so much more. So here are five different areas that we can start to work on in order to just increase, like automatically, really, all the different parts of our life, depending on where our graph is in terms of currently and in the future. And I would say, just for parenthetically, one of the biggest tricks that we have to try to deal with in life is like setting a goal, but being happy and content or proud or appreciative or whatever that word is that you want to insert there before we even get to the goal. You see, how is it possible that I have such dreams, I have such aspirations to do X, Y, and Z, and yet I'm not there yet? So how can I be happy? I'm sort of missing something, right? By saying I want something better, I'm actually showing that there's a gap between where I am and where I want to go. And we have to recognize that that gap is healthy and that gap is okay. And if we can start to recognize how to view that gap, how to understand how we should really perceive it, then we'll be able to really become successful. And that's one of the areas that I think we really need to work on. But first, I want to talk about just being nicer to yourself. You wouldn't be a jerk necessarily to somebody else, whether it's your spouse or your kid or your friend or some random person on the street, or maybe you would, who knows? But you're not going to be a jerk to that person. So, why is it that we're such jerks to ourselves? You see, so many people put so much more pressure on themselves. And for certain people, maybe it helps them perform better because they're putting the pressure on, but it's definitely raising their level of stress within their own personal lives. And if we could just be kinder to ourselves and nicer to ourselves, and this doesn't mean that we should take our foot off the gas, but to recognize that we don't have to beat ourselves up. Like we can inspire ourselves, we can motivate ourselves, we can say, "Come on, Bennett, like why don't we get better?" But it doesn't mean we have to beat ourselves up. And it's something that I think so many people do, and I think it's because they have a low self-esteem and they have just low self-worth about themselves, and they just take themselves and they just really pound themselves into the dirt. They don't realize the capabilities and what they have accomplished. And I'm not saying that everything is glory and everything is fine, but I am saying that we have to be very careful about how it is we talk about ourselves. Because if you would try to explain yourself to somebody else, you might, if you're that type of person, talk bad about yourself. You might talk down about yourself. You might talk about all the things you've done wrong instead of saying, hey, you know what? Although I could have done something differently in X, Y, and Z, I did pretty well in this area of my life, or did well in this specific thing. And there's somebody who I know who, if you had to take all the different buckets of his life, so his relationships, his spirituality, his own personal growth, his health, in all those buckets, he's doing, I would say, above average. However, there's one bucket that he is just beating himself up with because he hasn't figured out how it works yet. And it's so unfortunate because he has everything. 90% of his life is amazing. The relationship he has with his spouse and his kids and his health and all the other areas of his life are so much better. And he just has one area that he can't get himself to just get over. And he keeps focusing on that one area. And wherever we focus, our energy is going to go. And if we could recognize, hey, you know what? I need to be kinder to myself. Yes, I need to figure this out. Yes, you need to continue to work and you need to put your foot on the gas. But I am doing pretty well in other areas because I know people who might be doing well in that specific area, but guess what? They have no relationship with anybody. They're miserable. They're anxious. They're stressed. They're overweight. They're doing all these other things. And if we can start to recognize, hey, yes, I need to continue to move forward. However, I'm doing pretty good. I'm pretty nice to myself. You're going to see you'll be able to move forward in those other areas. You'll be kinder to yourself. So when you do, quote unquote, hit that wall, you'll be able to break through it. You'll be able to figure out and get creative and be more resourceful on what it is you can actually do. And that is the first part, is being kinder to yourself. The second thing you need to start doing is you need to start investing in yourself. You see, so many times people want things to get better and they just think that when they come to life, like they should be getting better. However, we have to recognize that if we're not working, if we're not growing, if we're not learning to do more, to become more, then why would life be different? Why would we be different if our lives are really just the same as they were yesterday? And if we could start to recognize, hey, I need to get better, I need to learn this skill, then guess what? Our life is going to be different. And if we could just stack these skills on top of one another, you can't compare who you are versus who you're going to be or who you can be. And that is what we have to start to understand. And I think most people get overwhelmed by the fact that it might take 2-3 years to learn a specific skill. Or I'm not a numbers guy, so I can't learn how to do accounting. Or you know what? I'm just not a healthy person. Like I've been on a million diets and it hasn't worked for me. And if we could recognize that, hey, you know what? Doesn't mean it's not going to work. We just haven't found it yet. And we have to continuously move forward and continuously learn the different things that we could be doing in order to become that person. Then guess what? Then we can actually start to become who it is that we want to become. We can start to see and really understand what it is that is necessary to get to that level of success. Because most of the time, our expectations are just off. If our expectations are off, then of course we're going to not achieve whatever it is because we just don't really understand what it takes. And the more work you put in and the more you do it, the more you're going to actually understand what it really takes. And then you start to understand. I remember that happened to me with sales when I started like doing my reach outs and I was doing like texting 3 people a day. And I was like, why isn't this thing working? Why isn't this thing working? And I got to a point in my business career where I was so desperate that I heard all these gurus talking about you have to make 100 calls a day. You have to make 100 reach outs. And it got to that point where like, all right, I got to make 100 reach outs. And for a week I did it. And I was like shocked by the fact that I'm like, oh my gosh, I have calls now. I have so many warm leads now. And it was the first time where I recognized what the level is of that's necessary to become successful. And imagine if I do this every single week. Imagine if I continue to do this. Imagine what can happen. And that is where we have to understand. And that's what we have to try to figure out. What are the right expectations? What are the skills we need to learn? What is it that we need to be taking on, what books do we need to be reading, what podcasts do we need to have in order to really start to do those specific things. And if we can start to understand those things, then guess what? Then we'll be able to achieve the goals that we want to be achieving. The third idea is something that I'm currently working on, is my health. Because at the end of the day, you could have everything, but if you don't have your health, if you're sick, if you're overweight, if you're tired, lethargic, then everything else might not really matter. Unfortunately, I know so many people who have so much, but because they're unhealthy, and not unhealthy because of something that happened, unhealthy because they just never looked out after their weight, or unhealthy because they're always eating certain things that they know they shouldn't be eating, things that we have more control over. It's really something that is really important. And I think until, unfortunately, there's some type of scare, whether it's in that person's life or someone in that person's circle, then we really start to recognize what's going on here. Like, wow, this is really important. And I remember with me personally, I had that quote unquote scare when I had like three grandparents die within the 5 weeks of each other, all unrelated situations. It was like the most bizarre thing. And for me, that was like a big wake up call, that I'm like, I want to be healthy because I want to be able to live the life that I want to live. And my health is going to be a huge part of that. Because how many people don't necessarily have the health that they have, or when they're getting older, they're just more achy, or they're just not able to move as much, or they're not able to get up early in the morning, or to go on a walk, or to go on a run, or to work out, or do all these things because they've never done it before and their bodies are just torn apart. And if we could understand, our bodies are like a car. Like, I think this is a great example. If you have a car, so you need to fill it with gasoline. So when we fill it with gasoline, there's like three different styles of gasoline you could put in. And most people go for the cheapest one because it's the cheapest one. But if I could guarantee for you, and the whole reason why people don't do this, but if I could guarantee you that if you would use the super, meaning you would pay the extra 50 cents or 75 cents or a dollar and a half, whatever that it is by now, just to get the best gasoline. However, that gasoline would save your car 7 to 10 years. Would you do it? If I could guarantee that. So there's more of a thought and a thought process moving forward. Like, oh, maybe it's worth it. Although it may cost me more now, but I'm going to be able to have this car for a longer time. And I think that nowadays, I think most people lease their cars, so like they don't care what happens after 2 or 3 years or 5 years, whatever it is, or people know that they're going to get another car beyond whatever it is. But the idea of it is the same thing with our own bodies. Yes, okay, for the beginning of our lives, we can eat this junk food, we can eat unhealthy, but at a certain time, our bodies start to react to how we've been eating. And if we could start to understand, hey, how does this stuff work? And it's so complicated. And there's always so many new diet stuff that coming out and everything like that. And I have zero idea about that stuff. But I'm starting to learn. I'm starting to work on it. I'm starting to be more conscious about it. And by doing that, you can actually start to become better. We can start to learn about our health. And I think that is so important in terms of what it is we can start to do. If we could do that, then guess what? Then we can start to be healthier. We can start to live the lives we want to be living and really start to move forward with what it is we want to be doing. The fourth idea is we need to constantly be working on being present. You see, so many times people are so focused on the future that they're not focused on what's going on today. And if we can work on just being more present, I really think people will just be so much more content with their life because they're so focused on what's going to happen. And this is something that is very difficult for me personally, just because I'm very organized. I have my whole schedule. I want things to be a certain way, and I'm constantly planning forward. I told my wife the other day we're going to town, into the city, and I was like, I'm very excited for today, but I'm so stressed about like where I'm going to park. I don't know if anybody relates to that, but for me, looking like trying to plan every little thing is like a huge stress. So understanding that, yes, I'm gonna have to figure out the parking situation, but like, there's no possible way I am going to know what that parking situation is. I could maybe look up a parking lot earlier, whatever it is, but understanding that I need to figure out what it is that I'm going to be doing, I'm never going to have necessarily all the answers. And it's something that I'm trying to work on. Of although I could plan and although I should plan, but being present is where life happens. And most people worry about what's going to be happening in the future, and they don't live their lives because they're constantly living in the future. It's funny because you can either live in your future or you live in your past, but nobody's living here and now. And if we could just live where we are, we will be so much more content with what's going on. And I'm not necessarily the freestylist where it's like, oh, let me just like not think about anything. No, it's like plan for structure and figure that stuff out. But there's like a time for that. But most of the time we should be living, okay, what can we be doing now? What is the process? What are the things that I need to be getting done this moment or today in order to make sure that I'm actually living the life that I want to be living? If we start to do that, then life could really be changing. And the fifth idea that I really want to speak about is appreciation. I know everybody speaks about appreciation, but it's one of those things that it's really important. There's a reason why everybody speaks about it. But if we could start to appreciate life just a little bit more, appreciate the small things just a little bit more, life is going to be so much better for us. And even if you want to say like, well, life is really negative, like so you could either live in the negativity or you could find the positivity. And just how when things are dark, if you would take a light, the light would be even more powerful. So like nowadays, even if you want to say it's darker and it's not as it used to be, but when we could live that life with a light in it, we can start to notice that positivity. When we can start to, instead of looking at all the terrible news, see something that is beneficial, something that is good news, then guess what? We'll be able to really start to blossom and really start to see certain things. And I think it's important to understand that we all have this ability to really shift our perspective. And it's all a perspective because everything is happening. The reality is what it is, but we have the ability to really shift what it is and how it is that we want to see things. We could start to understand what those things are, then guess what? We'll be able to really become those people, and we'll be able to do the things that we want to be doing, and really be able to take advantage of all the different things that we take advantage of. So number one, make sure to be kind to yourself. Number two, you better invest in yourself and look to continue to grow. Number three is to become healthy. Number four, be present. And number five, appreciate. If you do those things, how can life not be better? And it's not necessarily the input. It's not necessarily the graph on top, but it's what is we can start to do underneath to help those graphs continue to move forward.